Before we start, drop a quick note in the comments. Where are you watching from, and what time is it where you are right now? I'm asking because time matters in this story. On Galveston Island in 1896, dawn was a currency, and the first light over the Gulf decided who got to be called clean. The boarding house sat 2 blocks from the beach, a long wooden building with a porch that held more secrets than chairs. People in town called it Mallory House, after the owner, a widow who never smiled in public and never rushed in private. Her given name appears in tax books as Ada L. Mallory, age 47, widow, property, and fixtures assessed at $1,800. What the ledger does not say is what every rival housekeeper knew. Ada sold something no other boarding house dared to list on a rate sheet. She sold proof. She sold mourning. At first light, the line formed along her porch and down the path toward the Bath Wharf, a narrow pier jutting into the quiet water of the Back Bay. Men from the dock stood with their coats folded over arms, boots tied together and slung across shoulders. A pair of railroad porters held their caps under their elbows. Women from the seamstress shops kept to the far side of the queue, eyes down, tickets clutched in their gloves. A sailor with a split lip whistled as if he were not bleeding. A boy from the iceworks shifted a block hook from hand to hand. The line looked like any other working morning until you noticed the tickets and the way they did not match. They were called purity tickets, and they came in 2 kinds. The first was a pale card stamped with the letter C for cleanliness, sold in strips like train stubs. The second was heavier, embossed with a small cross and the word cleared. The town pretended not to know the difference, but everyone did. A cleanliness card got you 30 minutes at the Bath Wharf and a towel with the boarding house initials stitched into a corner. A cleared card was more expensive, and it came with a different promise. If a man was found in a place he should not be, or a woman was asked a question she could not answer, a cleared card said someone in authority would vouch that nothing improper had happened at Mallory House. The card said you were decent, even when you were simply present. I came across the system by starting somewhere else. The county keeps a sanitation docket from that year, a slim book with pages that curl like burnt bread. It lists cholera warnings after the spring flood, fines for dumping, and a single complaint written in an unfamiliar hand. Inspection practices at the Mallory bathing pier encourage indecency. The complaint is unsigned, but the clerk's note at the margin says, "Seen by P. Hay, M.D., the city's part-time health officer and full-time pastor at a church 2 streets away." Pastor-physician Hay was the island's reputation referee, and he visited the boarding house at least twice a week. Town memory adds the missing color. People remembered the smell of carbolic soap on the pier. They remembered the bell Ada Mallory rang when the first bath was open, and the second bell when the next ticket holder could approach. They remembered the black notebook Ada kept under her shawl, and the way she wrote with her thumb tucked under the chalked edge of a pencil. They remembered the sisters. Their names were Hattie and Lenora Witt. Hattie was 19 and could stitch a collar without a pattern. Lenora was 17 and could mimic any embroidery stitch after seeing it once. They arrived on a steamer from Houston with a trunk they had to drag themselves, and they came to Mallory House because a woman at the mission station said the rooms were plain and safe. The mission woman was correct about plain. The rooms were spare as a hymn, beds narrow as pews, a washstand and a hook for a dress. Ada did not rent without conditions. Rent was weekly in coin, and every resident purchased 1 cleanliness card for each day they stayed. For women, the rule was not optional. For men, it was strongly suggested. Hattie liked rules because she believed rules kept bad things from happening. Lenora did not like rules because she had already watched bad things happen while rules were being recited. They were alike only in their need for quiet. That first week they rose before sunup and took their place in the line with sleeves rolled and hair pinned. The dockmen made way. Say what you will about Galveston's roughness, a morning line for bathing still called for courtesy. When the bell rang the first time, a tall man in suspenders stepped onto the pier. He carried a cleared card between his first two fingers and held it up so Ada could see the stamp. Ada nodded. At the far end, a canvas screen made a makeshift stall, the gulf on three sides, a barrel of fresh water set beside a plank seat. The man disappeared behind the canvas, and steam lifted into the fresh air. Ada watched 1 minute, 2, 3, and then drew a small circle in her notebook. The circle meant the card had been used properly. She never said what the other marks meant, but I have seen her notebook in a glass case now, and the other marks are there. There are crosses, there are X's, there are tiny triangles drawn where circles should have been. She was not only selling proof, she was recording what she saw. Pastor Physician Hay arrived just after the first 6 tickets were redeemed. He wore a coat, even as the heat built. He shook Ada's hand and asked in a voice meant for the line, "Are we keeping the morning orderly, Mrs. Mallory?" She answered in a voice meant only for him, "Always, Doctor." The honorific hung between them like the fog off the bay. The sisters watched the exchange and did not understand it yet. They noticed only that the pastor waited near the head of the line without a ticket, and that no one minded. They noticed the way some men switched from the cleanliness card to the cleared card when the pastor stood in view. They noticed that Ada's pencil moved faster whenever the doctor's eyes were elsewhere. By the third morning, the sisters learned the first 2 unwritten rules. Rule 1, you did not ask to buy a cleared card. Ada offered it. Rule 2, the offer always arrived in a moment when you could not comfortably refuse. For Hattie, the offer came while she was sewing buttons at the front window. Ada stood behind her and placed a heavier card on the sill, casual as a coaster. For days when the inspection falls late, Ada said, it will save you worry. Hattie did not look at the price penciled on the back. She did not want to see the number and decide. She slid the card under her work and told herself she would never need it. Lenora was not offered a card at all. Ada watched her longer, as if waiting to see what kind of trouble this younger girl preferred. If you are wondering why anyone tolerated a widow selling anything called purity, remember the island's economy at the time. Galveston's waterfront was money stacked into crates, cotton, cattle, lumber, sugar. There were more men than bathtubs and more reputation than oversight. Merchants brought their wives to winter in clean seaside boarding houses. Clerks brought their lungs to mend in the salt air. Wealth and rumor lived next door, a system that reduced scandal to paperwork, suited people who needed to appear respectable while doing what they already intended to do. The purity tickets did not create temptation. They managed it. The first hint of how the system could be bent came with a man named Silas Lott, a shipping agent who understood paper better than most. Lott purchased 6 cleanliness cards on Monday and a single cleared card with no date. He bathed once, loudly, for show. He did not use the pier again that week, and yet on Friday, Ada's notebook shows a triangle by his name and the note upstairs parlor after curfew. Lott had found a loophole. The cleared card, once in his pocket, traveled to any room in the boarding house where being discovered would be inconvenient. If anyone accused him of being where he should not be, he could raise the card and say, "I have been cleared." It was a talisman made from thick paper and mutual pretense. That same Friday, the sisters were coming back from the wharf when they nearly collided with Pastor Physician Hay in the corridor. He had his hand on the doorknob of the upstairs parlor. Hattie apologized first, because Hattie apologized first for anything. The pastor smiled and said no harm, and then he looked at the towel over Lenora's arm, damp with a line of dark water along the edge. He said, "For your own protection, ladies, be sure to present your cards if anyone ever asks." Lenora asked who would be asking. The pastor said, "Anyone who cares for your reputation as we do, Miss Witt." He opened the parlor door and stepped inside, where Silas Lott was waiting with a ledger that was not Ada's. Here is where the thread tightens. The house rules posted by the front door say, "Quiet after 10, no men in the women's wing without staff present, and no women in the men's wing ever." They do not say what happens in the parlor at dusk when the curtains are half drawn, and a doctor with a collar pin sits with a businessman whose hair never moves. The rules Ada speaks aloud are about towels and time slots, but the rules she writes in the notebook are about who may pass whom in a corridor without losing face. She is selling mornings, but she is also arbitrating evenings. The first real incident arrives as a simple missing towel. A maid named Jewel counts 3 towels short after the second bell. Towels are inventory, and Ada treats inventory as scripture. She asks the line to wait and walks the pier herself, not to recover cloth, but to watch expressions. She sees the hesitation settle on Hattie's face. Hattie has done nothing wrong. She is simply the kind of person who looks guilty when order is broken. Ada could say nothing and keep her system intact. Instead, she speaks to the sisters in the hearing of men who listen for any small drama. "Ladies, did you return the towels you were issued?" Hattie answers yes at once. Lenora, who returned hers as well, hears the danger in the question and says only, "We used what we were given." Ada nods, enters 2 marks in the book, and dismisses the line. That night, someone leaves a towel outside the sister's door, folded into a neat square. No one admits it in the morning. Ada marks a circle by Jewel's name and a triangle beside the sisters. The triangle moves with them from that moment, whether they know it or not. If this feels petty, consider what petty rules do in a town that polices women by rumor. A triangle by your name can be the difference between a foreman calling you to the front of the line or to the back alley. A circle can mean the difference between a landlady believing your story and deciding you must leave before the month is out. Ada's notebook is a private court, and Pastor Physician Hay is the appeals judge who stops by to pray over the docket. You might be asking why Ada did this, why a widow would choose to balance a town's respectability on slips of paper and chalk marks. People who remember her say she hated surprises. Her husband died in a stevedore accident that took 2 others under a load of lumber. The coroner wrote instantaneous. Ada watched the morning he was carried home on a door used as a stretcher. After that, she built a life in which nothing arrived without a ticket attached and no one approached without signaling their purpose. She convinced herself that order could be as good as virtue, and once she believed it, she began to sell the belief to everyone who needed it. The last piece of Chapter 1 is the moment the system touches the sisters directly and leaves a mark. Late one night, Hattie wakes to soft voices in the corridor. She opens the door an inch and sees Ada and the pastor standing outside the upstairs parlor. Ada holds the black notebook. The pastor holds a small camera obscura box used for making silhouettes onto glass plates, the kind carnival photographers carry. He is not smiling. Ada is not speaking. The door to the parlor opens, and Silas Lott steps out with his hat in his hand and the brim pinched tight, as if holding a secret at its edge. He passes Ada a cleared card with the corner bent and says, "I believe this has served." Ada adds it to the notebook and replies, "It always does when handled properly." The pastor turns the lens of the little camera toward the parlor and then toward the corridor, as if measuring light. Hattie closes the door before anyone can see her watching. She does not tell Lenora until morning. At the water line the next day, the sisters find the line longer and the air sharper, as if the Gulf knows more than it did yesterday. The bell rings. Ada checks tickets. Pastor Physician Hay stands again without a card, nodding when certain men lift their chins. Hattie keeps her eyes on the planks. Lenora stares at the camera case set on a chair at the head of the pier and realizes that someone has begun to collect proof of who is where at what hour. Cleanliness used to be soap and fresh water. Now it is a photograph in a box you cannot open. And that is where we leave this first hour on the Gulf. A widow with a ledger, a pastor with a lens, a businessman with a bent card, and two sisters who do not yet understand that in Galveston the morning line is not about bathing at all. It is about who gets believed. The Bath Wharf felt honest because it was outside. The inspections did not. They happened in a room that faced the alley, the only room in Mallory House without a window to the street. Ada called it the lamp room. Jewel called it the hot box. Pastor Physician Hay called it the infirmary, and when he used that word, men relaxed. The room had a door that stuck in damp weather, a rolling screen, a washstand, a wall of hooks, and a shelf with carbolic, gauze, and a red tin labeled camphor. A cast-iron lantern hung from a ceiling hook on a short chain. It threw a careful circle of light on a mark Ada had burned into the floor with a poker to show where a person should stand. Every woman who rented a bed passed through the lamp room within 48 hours. The routine was always the same and always took under 10 minutes unless Ada decided it would take longer. Step to the mark. State your name. Present your cleanliness card for punching. Ada or Jewel wrote the hour in the notebook. Pastor Physician Hay stood back by the washstand and asked ordinary questions in a gentle voice. Cough, fever, sores, faintness, bleeding. He never wrote the answers. Ada did. If a woman hesitated, Ada reminded her that the city had cholera every summer and Mallory House had never lost a boarder. The line sounded like care. The system worked like control. The light did half the work. Under the lantern circle, damp cloth reads as shadow, and shadow can be called anything by someone with a title. The pastor's questions set a rhythm. Ada's pencil set the judgment. When a woman answered briskly and kept her jaw up, Ada punched her card and said, "Sleep near the window, mornings at 6. When she flinched or glanced at Jewel before answering, Ada paused, set a small metal stamp on the corner of the cleanliness card, and said, "We will mark you for 7 to spare the crowd." The metal stamp left a tiny raised dot you could feel with a fingernail. The dot told the hall attendant to route that person to the rear of the dawn line. No one argued, because no one wanted to say out loud what the dot meant. The peepholes were not rumor. They were hardware. A carpenter sealed 2 old stovepipe openings years earlier with nailed tin. Ada later had him drill new holes the size of a shirt button at shoulder height and paint them to match the wall. From the hallway you could not see them. From the lamp room you could. Ada used them to check whether a boarder had brought a friend to wait nearby, and she used them to read a face before opening the door. On 3 occasions, the peephole kept the door closed when Ada saw a man stand with his hat in both hands as if he intended to ask a favor. On more occasions, it let Ada time the pastor's arrival, so he appeared to walk in by chance during the last minute of an inspection. The last minute was when women swallowed. He liked to arrive for the swallow. Tokens made the whole thing elastic. Cleanliness cards were paper and easy to confiscate. Cleared cards were heavy stock with an embossed stamp, but they still wore out. Tokens solved 2 problems at once. Ada had a tinsmith punch, quarter-size slugs with a Maltese cross on one side and a raised C on the other. She kept them in a velvet pouch the color of dried blood. A token could swap hands in a hallway without noise and return to the pouch at night. A token could also be seen from 20 feet away between finger and thumb, like a small lantern. In the ledger, Ada wrote C. Cohen for a cleanliness token used instead of a card, and X cross for a cleared token. X cross always carried a higher price in the cash column than anything else on the page. The sisters learned about tokens when Jewel slipped one to Hattie after a long day on the wharf. Jewel said it was a kindness for fast hands. Hattie believed her. Lenora did not. She turned the token over twice and felt the groove of the cross and asked who redeemed it. Jewel said the desk. Lenora asked who stood next to the desk when the pouch was open. Jewel said sometimes Ada, sometimes the pastor, and sometimes Mr. Lott, if Ada had to see to the back steps. Lenora pocketed the token and decided never to show it in daylight. Pastor-physician Hay perfected a pairing trick that told you exactly how Ada and the church knitted their power. On Tuesdays and Fridays, Hay visited the lamp room with a doctor's bag and 2 objects, a bottle of tincture and a stack of chapel program slips printed with the words, "Lady Circle Attendance." If a woman seemed nervous under the lantern or flinched when Ada set the stamp, Hay offered the tincture and then suggested she attend a lady circle talk on modesty and hygiene that afternoon. The slip had a blank for a name. The first time, Ada wrote the name herself before handing the slip across, and the woman stammered thanks because a pastor had just called her a lady in public. The second time, Ada slid the slip onto the washstand without a name and said, "Bring this back," signed by Miss Prescott, who heads the circle. Miss Prescott also headed the lodging committee at the church that paid Mallory House for special care. The slip returned signed. The ledger got a mark. The woman got routed to 7. Lenora kept her eyes on mechanics. She noticed that Ada always worked the punch at the same angle and the stamp at the same corner. It made a pattern you could spot from across the hallway. She noticed that Jewel was faster when the pastor was absent and slower when he was present, as if she feared her own hands might be called improper. She noticed that men with cleared cards never entered the lamp room, but always passed the door in a way that let Ada see them. She noticed that Silas Lott watched other men's hands, as if counting which pockets held tokens. The camera changed the temperature. At first it sat in the upstairs parlor on a tripod, a small wooden box with a brass lens and a focusing cloth. Hay called it a silhouette maker and said it would help make keepsakes for winter families. By the end of the week, it had migrated to the lamp room. Hay propped it in the corner, lens capped, and told Ada the lens could train the room to be neat. People behave differently when they feel a lens pointing at their chest, he said. He was right. Women squared their shoulders. Ada straightened the ledger on the washstand. Jewel stopped wiping her hand on her apron and used a towel instead. On 2 nights, the lens was uncapped. The first uncapped night produced a glass plate Ada never displayed. Hay raised the cloth, leaned to the ground glass, and asked the woman on the mark to hold still. He did not say exposure. He said, "Hold your breath." Ada stood behind him and watched the woman's jaw. The plate captured a blur of shoulder and the hard shine of the lantern, but it also captured the corner of Ada's ledger and the reflection of Hay's collar pin in the washstand glass. When he slid the plate into the drying rack, he wrote "Test" on the sleeve. A week later, he made 3 more plates and wrote nothing. The plates were not proof of indecency. They were proof that a pastor-physician had set up a camera in a room where women stood under a lantern and answered questions, and that itself would keep mouths shut. Silas Lott expanded his use of cleared cards after the camera appeared. He began to time his parlor visits directly after lamproom hours, so any woman seen in the corridor could be called a patient. He also bought tokens rather than cards, which meant nothing with his name on it changed hands. Ada collected the coins in the velvet pouch and wrote X cross with a number. The number next to X cross was always neat and round, 2 por 0, 3 os oro, sometimes 5 quanquo. The number next to a woman's rent on those nights had a second head Ada called adjustment. Adjustment was never explained. It appeared after evenings when the parlor door closed softly and the camera stood on its tripod with the lens cap on, like a guest who guaranteed nothing would be seen. Hattie tried to believe that all of this still meant safety. She kept her card dry, she answered briskly, she bought no extra tokens, and she returned towels in a square fold that said, "I am careful." Lenora stopped caring about ceremony and started caring about paper. She asked Jewel to show her how the punch worked and whether the raised dot on a corner could be shaved flat with a knife. Jewel swore her not to try it and then admitted that Ada checked corners with her thumb every time a card changed hands. Lenora asked whether a token could be traded back for a card without a mark. Jewel said, not unless someone wrote your name in the ledger with a small cross beside it. Lenora asked, who got crosses? Jewel said women who could be trusted in a parlor and men who could be trusted not to break a door. The first crack came from outside Ada's control. A city sanitary inspector named Merritt visited the island to count privies and drains after a late summer storm, and his route brought him down the alley by the lamproom door at an hour when the second inspection was underway. He saw the lantern through the crack and heard the pastor's voice say, "For your protection, place your hands on the washstand." Merritt had no reason to knock. He was counting drains, not rooms. He walked on and wrote 2 words in his little book that Ada would never see. Lamproom practice. He later mentioned the phrase to a clerk at the courthouse who spent Saturdays setting lines at a print shop for church programs. That phrase would make it into a margin long after this week was over. Ada heard something in Merritt's boot rhythm that made her tighten the system. She changed the order of questions in the lamproom and began to insist on ladies' circle slips for any woman routed to 7. She also started pairing women, 2 at a time for the inspection, 1 in the circle of light and 1 waiting inside the door. On paper, it looked like decency. In practice, it meant 1 witness to every swallow, and any complaint would be answered by another woman's memory, saying nothing improper happened. Pastor-physician Hay called it good order. He had invented a chaperone who would serve his version of the truth. Tokens began to outnumber paper. Men liked the feel of metal. Women liked that tokens left no names in trash. With more tokens, Ada's ledger began filling with entries that were cleaner to read and dirtier to explain. C coin, X cross, adjustment. Hattie's line stayed ordinary. Lenora's line sprouted dots. The dot in the corner started keeping her at 7, even on days she had worked a double and needed the water before anyone else. When she asked Ada why, Ada said, "Your sister worries, child, and worry reads badly in a lamp room." Lenora said, "I answer your questions." Ada said, "Your eyes answer mine." The breach that made this chapter matter arrived in 2 motions: a missing token and a wrong card. The missing token belonged to Jewel. She had kept one as insurance, tucked into the hem of her apron where Ada would never check. One night it was gone, either lifted by a quick hand or shaken loose into the bath wharf boards and kicked into the water. The wrong card belonged to Hattie. She had never bought a cleared card, but Ada laid one on the sill during mending with a penciled total at the bottom of Hattie's rent sheet. Hattie brought the sheet to Ada and said the number was wrong. Ada asked if Hattie wished to dispute the value of her reputation after the matter of the towel. Hattie went silent and signed. Lenora took the signed sheet later and turned it over. On the back, Ada had pressed the corner of the cleared card so hard the embossed cross left a ghost. Pastor Physician Hay folded the camera cloth and told Ada the system was keeping the island calm. He did not see that the sisters had begun to keep papers in a trunk divided with needle boxes, rent sheets, ladies' circle slips, one keycard with a shaved corner that still showed a faint ridge, and one glass plate sleeve filched from the parlor that read "Test" in the pastor's hand. They kept the sleeve because the word was the first thing in this entire building the pastor had written in a way that admitted he was trying something. Intent matters when you do not have a witness who will speak. Lenora asked Jewel a question no one had asked her out loud. Who benefits if the cleared card is shown in a hallway by a man who is not a boarder? Jewel said whoever holds the notebook at the end of the night. Lenora asked who holds it then. Jewel said Ada, if it is about towels and time, and the pastor, if it is about peace. Lenora asked what peace costs. Jewel said $2 if you are lucky, and $5 if you are not. Lenora asked who decides lucky. Jewel did not answer. Ada tightened one more screw. She told women with triangles that they would lose their beds if they missed a ladies' circle meeting without a note. Miss Prescott began collecting notes. Her drawer filled with slips that said "ill" in a dozen hands and papers that said nothing except the name "wit" written twice and pressed hard enough to dent the wood. Miss Prescott felt important for the first time in years and told the pastor she was helping protect girls. He nodded and said her work would be remembered. He did not tell her what the tokens bought after dusk. The night the system stumbled, the lantern faltered. The wick burned to a knot, and the circle of light shrank. Hattie stood on the mark, answered briskly, and reached with 2 fingers to pull the wick up. Ada slapped her hand away and said, "Do not touch instruments of order." Hattie flinched and said sorry, and looked at the camera on its tripod. The lens was uncapped. She held still without being told. In the glass she saw the tiny reversed reflection of Ada's black ledger and the pastor's collar pin like a star. She also saw the doorframe and the peephole circle as a black eye on the wall. She held very still and realized that even stillness could be used as proof of consent by anyone who wanted to read it that way. Lenora came next and did not hold still. She lifted her chin, answered quickly, and asked the one thing no one asks in a room built to make people obedient. Why is there a token that makes a man clean without water? Pastor Physician Hay said tokens do not make men clean, they mark order so nothing gets misread. Lenora said then, why does Mr. Lot carry his into rooms where curtains are half closed? Ada said you should not be near rooms where curtains are half closed. Lenora said, then take the triangle off my name and stop sending me to 7. Ada set the stamp on her card and pressed so hard the dot cut the paper. The pastor said, for your protection, Miss Witt, remember that order is the kindest way to live among strangers. Lenora said, I am not among strangers. I am being watched. Ada closed the notebook and said inspections were finished for the night. She slid the pouch of tokens into her apron pocket, lifted the lantern down, and told Jewel to carry the washstand pitcher to the porch because the Gulf air would keep the smell from building. Hattie held the door. Lenora stood in the half-light and watched the pastor cap the lens and coil the cloth. He paused with the cap in his hand and looked at her. He could not square what she had said with the words he liked to use for himself. He lifted the cap, put it on, and left without blessing the room. The last sound was Jewel setting the pitcher on the porch rail. It scraped the paint. Ada logged the scrape in her head the way she logged everything. She would bill it as maintenance. She would call it proof of care. She would not write the sentence that sat under every mark in her book. A dot in the corner of a card buys my peace and sells yours. The first sign was not smoke. It was a sound that did not belong to a boarding house at dusk, a click like a gun that turned out to be the camera's shutter. Pastor Physician Hay had moved the tripod from the parlor to the upstairs hallway, lens aimed at the door of the lamp room, while Ada pretended to check towel counts. He called it a focus test. Jewel called it foolish. Lenora called it what it looked like, a record. Hattie told her to keep sewing because the rent did not wait for philosophy. Ada had started a new rule that week. No one crossed the upstairs landing after 9 unless they held a cleanliness card or a token between finger and thumb where she could see it. On paper, the rule separated men and women. In practice, it created a parade of small, compliant motions for the camera to catch. A hand lifted, a card flashed, a face turned away from the lens. The door closed. Order documented itself in slivers. Silas Lott changed the rule's meaning without saying a word. He began arriving at 9 with a folded newspaper under his arm and a cleared card tucked inside it. He would stand in the corridor, tip the card an inch so Ada could note it, and then step into the parlor with his hat off and his shoulders squared for diplomacy. The first night he did this, the pastor turned the camera toward the parlor door and set the shutter for a long count. The plate dried with a gray smear where a face should be and a clear impression where a bent card sat on a table. Proof is not always a face. Sometimes it is a posture. Hattie and Lenora sat on their trunk that same night and sorted their own papers. They had 3 Lady Circle slips signed by Miss Prescott, 2 rent sheets with adjustments, 1 cleanliness card with its corner cut by Ada's stamp deep enough to fray, and 1 plate sleeve with the word test in Hay's hand that Lenora had lifted when Jewel left the parlor door ajar. They did not have the one thing that would make a clerk set a file down and listen, a page that showed how the tokens moved money. Ada's ledger lived under her shawl and in her hand. It never left her reach when strangers were near. Lenora solved one problem the way she solved most things. She put her eye to the keyhole when no one was watching. The lamp room had 2 peepholes. The parlor had none. But the office, the little room off the stairway where Ada kept the cash box, the velvet pouch, and the ledger at night, had a keyhole that told you where the desk sat and how Ada laid the book open under the lamp. On Thursday after supper, when the house hummed with cutlery and the pastor led a prayer downstairs, Lenora stood with her cheek to the door and watched Ada do her arithmetic. The ledger page carried 3 columns: tickets and coins in, rooms and towels out, adjustments. The last head had a mark that was not a number, a cross. Ada wrote X cross beside certain names, and then, down the margin, gave a neat figure that matched what Jewel called peace. She told Hattie what she had seen, and Hattie went still in that way that makes gentle people look like they have lied. She had not lied. She had accepted what was offered, because survival never feels like consent while you are handing over coins. They decided to stop being the kind of people who only watch things happen. They would take a page, not steal the book. Take a page. The closed curtains came next. Ada had hung heavy muslin curtains across the upstairs parlor windows on a brass rod a week earlier to keep the glare off the plate. She also purchased a new curtain for the office and made Jewel hem it. On Friday night, after the last inspection, Ada drew both sets of curtains tight, set the camera on its tripod inside the parlor, and turned the lens toward the office door across the hall. Jewel rubbed her arms and said it was too hot for all that cloth. Ada said the house needed less seeing and more order. The pastor said the camera could teach both. Then he uncapped the lens. If you are wondering why the curtains matter, it is because the parlor window gave the alley a line of sight. With the curtains closed and the lens uncapped, anyone in the alley saw nothing, and the camera saw the hallway, the office door, and whoever raised a card at 9. The plate that night captured 3 things in clean outlines: a palm holding a token with a cross, the corner of a ledger page turned at the edge of the desk, the shape of a girl watching from the stair. Lenora did not move fast enough. In the morning, Hay marked the sleeve with nothing at all. The absence of a word was the point. The office fire began in the wastebasket under the desk at 11:37 p.m., according to the superintendent of the watch, whose job was to note times even when all he saw was flame. No one died. The blaze set the curtain alight, ate the chair, blistered the paint, and smoked the ledger cover without reaching the pages inside. Ada told the fireman with the leather helmet that a lamp had tipped. The fireman told her lamps did not tip without hands. He wrote accidental on the form because he did not want to stand in a hallway and accuse a widow of lying. The pastor stood a step to the left and said nothing. Silas Lott picked ash from his sleeve as if it had spoiled a suit he liked. Hattie and Lenora were the last to leave the hallway. Before the fireman moved the desk, Lenora slid her hand under the drawer and felt what woodworkers leave by accident and householders leave by fear: a slipboard, a false bottom. She pressed. The board gave. Out slid a leather envelope scorched at one corner and a stack of glass plates wrapped in a towel. Hattie took the envelope because it looked like a thing a woman can carry without being asked what it is. Lenora took the towel because a towel belongs anywhere in a house with water. They walked down the stairs into the alley and did not stop until the Gulf breeze hit their faces. They opened the envelope in the shadow of the bath wharf. Inside were 4 things: a paper stamped with a cross and the words "End of Month," a list of combined tickets and tokens, the initials AM at the bottom, 2 cleared cards without names, both with the corners bent, both bearing the faint thumb ridge of Ada's left finger, a thin stack of single-entry slips with adjustments written in Ada's hand, totals that matched rent sheets as if they were part of the same honest bookkeeping, and a small card with the words "Parlor Use" written in Pastor-Physician Hay's hand, the ink too steady for a man whose night had just included a fire. They did not need to debate what the card meant. Parlor use had always meant one thing in Mallory House. It meant the room could be called respectable on paper and used for anything else behind the curtain. The towel held 3 glass plates. The first was a blur and the white flare of the lantern. The second was the clean outline of a hand holding a token between finger and thumb at chest height, the cross side up. The angle of the knuckles light matched a man who worked outdoors. The third was the shot made down the hallway toward the office door. You could see the ledger's corner, Ada's sleeve, and a shape at the stair rail that only the sisters would recognize. Lenora raised the towel to let the moon help. In the negative, she saw herself. That is the kind of proof that stops some people and animates others. Hattie wanted to burn the plates because she imagined the pastor raising them in a sermon and naming her a careless girl. Lenora wanted to keep them because a plate with her outline and the ledger's corner would force a clerk to sit up straight. They compromised because people who survive make compromise into a habit. They wrapped the plates back in the towel and put the envelope into the trunk under sewing notions. Then they lay awake until dawn and waited for the chorus of explanations to begin. Ada didn't scream. She did not have a screaming voice. She gathered Jewel and 2 men from the dock to carry the ruined chair into the alley, and she sent for a glazier to cut a new pane for the office window. She told the sisters and 2 other boarders to sweep the hallway, and she anchored the conversation by using practical words. Misfortune, repairs, accounting delayed. Dr. Hay arrived with a preacher's calm and a carpenter's excuse. He said the camera had been in the parlor and the lens had been capped. He said he would hold a short prayer beside the blackened door at noon to steady nerves. He did not reach for the ledger. He did not have to. Ada already had it under her arm with a damp cloth around the cover. Silas Lott stood at the bottom of the stairs and watched the traffic with the eye of a man who has trained young clerks to carry paper without dropping it. He saw Hattie move a broom and Lenora carry the bucket. He saw Ada whisper to the pastor and Jewel count towels as if counting towels could make a night right. He said nothing to any of them. He walked into the parlor and checked the camera. 1 plate sleeve remained in the rack. He slipped it into his newspaper and folded the paper so the sleeve disappeared where the stock page would have been. He did not look at the lens. He looked at the curtains and smiled because cloth does half a man's work if he lets it. At noon, the prayer stood for exactly as long as Ada's house needed to pretend it was intact. Pastor Physician Hay read from a psalm about refuge and order and light. Ada said amen with an even tone and dismissed people to their rooms with a list of chores. Jewel fetched fresh water. A dockhand nailed the office door frame square again. The glazier set a new pane and charged $1, cash. Hattie took the broom to the stairs and swept ash into a pan with hands that didn't shake as much as she expected. Lenora went to the bath wharf with the bucket and walked slow enough to think. She was the one who decided to show the plates to someone who understood paper without allegiance to Ada or the church. Not the deputy, not the pastor's deacon. Henry, the printer at the corner of Post Office and 20th, the one who set church programs and election broadsides with the same neutral face. He was a man who knew that a nick in a letter could tie 2 lines across a town. He could look at a plate and tell you whether a sleeve and a ledger corner shared a frame. She asked Hattie for the towel. Hattie said, "You will bring it back." Lenora said yes and walked into the afternoon carrying a bundle that looked like laundry and a story that needed a man who kept his mouth shut until someone asked him to open it. At the shop door, Henry asked the question that men like him use to sort trouble from drama. Who else has seen this? Lenora said nobody. He said, "Good, come inside," and pulled the shade half down. He slid one plate from the towel into a viewing frame, held it up to the big window, where the light always looked like morning, and did not speak for 30 seconds. Then he said, without any poetry, that the plate showed what a clerk calls chain of custody, a token, a ledger, a hallway, a witness. He told her he could make a print on paper if the plate would hold. She told him he would not. The plate was going back in her trunk. He smiled like a man who has been given the gift of dealing with someone who has already decided what she will lose to keep a thing. Henry did not take the plates. He did something better. He showed Lenora how to lay onion paper over a ledger page and take a rubbing with a soft pencil, so the columns and heads spoke without the book leaving a room. And he gave her a paper wrapper with his shop name on it, so any hand that found the rubbing would assume it had been caught in an honest errand. He called it a proof of figures. He said it would tie Ada's numbers to the plate's shadows. He said it would make the camera less of a rumor and more of a tool against men who like to say the word improper without ever naming what they bought. By nightfall, Ada had a new curtain on the office, a dry cloth around the ledger, and a look that said she was going to tighten the rules until the house could not breathe. She told Jewel that all women would now present lady circle slips weekly, no exceptions. She told Hattie that rent would include one cleared card per month because a seamstress with clients must never be surprised by a knock after 9. She told Lenora nothing and watched her walk away with the bucket as if stillness could be taxed. She did not know that Lenora had returned a towel to a trunk with 3 plates, and that a printer had taught a girl how to make paper talk. Nail, closed curtains did not hide sin. They turned Ada's ledger, Hay's lens, and a man's token into one frame that could finally be read. The first real help did not come with a badge. It came with a wrapper. Henry folded Lenora's rubbing into a paper sleeve with his shop name on it and walked it to the county clerk who logged sanitation fines and boat registrations. The clerk lived on proof and dislike of theater. He set the rubbing beside 2 rent sheets with adjustments and the towel bundle with the glass plates still inside. He did not open the towel. He read the numbers. He took a stub pencil and wrote in block letters what he saw. Tokens and tickets recorded as income, adjustments tied to evenings, lady circle slips used as routing, camera presence. He signed his name and the time and the word received. He told Henry to go back to his type and to bring no one else until asked. The clerk sent 1 wire to Austin under the statute that let the state look at company lodging when it touched wages and hours. He did not use the word purity. He used dockage and discipline. He sent a 2nd wire to the city sanitary inspector Merritt asking for a statement about the phrase lamproom practice he had written in his little book. Merritt came in on the afternoon ferry with his satchel and the face of a man who knows he is about to make himself unpopular. He wrote 1 page that said he had heard the pastor instruct a woman to place her hands on a washstand for her protection under a lamp while a ledger was open, and that it did not resemble any medical check required by city code. The clerk added that page to the rubbing and stamped the packet with his seal. He did not send it to the deputy. He sent it to the paper. Emma did not print a sermon. She printed a notice. State inspector invited to review boarding house records. Ledger figures in hand. Lady circle slips being tallied. Camera use in question. She included the time and the place for a public inspection request delivery. Mallory House Office, 2 o'clock Thursday. She put the notice above the shipping news where men had to read it. She did not name Ada. She did not give the pastor his title. She wrote Hay. Ada walked to the paper with her ledger under a shawl and said the printing was an injury to a widow. Emma pointed at the notice and said the printing was a time. Ada asked whether the paper aimed to ruin a house that kept the cholera out. Emma said the house had kept more than cholera out, and that the state would decide which parts of the ledger counted as wages and which were theater. Ada left with her jaw locked and told Jewel to air the lamp room and polish the punch. She told Hattie that rent would be due early. She told Lenora nothing because silence felt like strength. At 2 o'clock, the clerk stood on Ada's porch with the state inspector, a neat man named Callow with a thin mustache and the solemn patience of someone trained to inventory feed stores and bunk lists. He asked for the ledger, the rent sheets for the quarter, the ladies' circle sign-in slips, and any records that showed token movement. Ada said the ledger was a private house book. Callow opened his statute and read the line that said any paper used to set hours, beds, or charges in a company lodging was a wage record. Ada said Mallory House was private. Callow said the city had paid Mallory House for special care under Ladies' Circle funds, and the church had written those checks, which made the house's rules public to the extent they moved money from women to men. He asked again. Ada set the ledger on the table and placed her hand on it as if it were a baby. Pastor-physician Hay arrived late, which let him watch who had already staked ground. He carried the camera under his arm with the lens capped, a mistake that made him look like a man who thought he could trade a piece of hardware for a favorable impression. Callow asked him whether the device had been used in any room where women were inspected. Hay said it had been used to make silhouettes as a pastime and to keep order by reminding people to behave. Merritt stood a foot behind him and said he had seen the lens uncapped at the lamp-room door and a woman told to hold her hands on the washstand. Hay said that never happened. Merritt said it had. Callow wrote both sentences down because that is how you keep rooms from arguing later about what was said. Silas Lott posted himself in the hallway with a newspaper and a little patience. He did not intend to be called. He intended to be seen, because being seen to be calm among people who aren't makes a man look like a solution. He watched Callow ask Ada to open the ledger to any page that showed X-cross and adjustment. Ada opened to a page from last month and put a finger on tickets and coins, as if the rest could be ignored if the first column looked sober. Callow moved her hand to the margin and read X-cross for 3 names with figures and the word adjustment next to 2 rent lines. He asked what X-cross meant. Ada said it meant cleared. He asked what cleared meant. Ada said it meant no one would misunderstand where a person had been. He asked why cleared cost money. Ada said order cost money to maintain. He asked who took the money. Ada said the house. Callow asked for the ladies' circle slips for the same week. Miss Prescott, summoned by a boy, arrived with a biscuit tin and the proud air of someone about to be thanked publicly. She placed the slips on the desk and beamed when Callow said her handwriting was tidy. He stacked the slips by day, matched them to Ada's ledger entries, and wrote a simple sum. Women with triangles showed up on the slips more often than others. Women with dots on their cards showed up more often still. The slips did not say what was taught. They said that a church committee helped root women to 7 in the morning and to a chair in the afternoon. Miss Prescott stopped beaming and asked whether she should have brought tea. Callow said he did not drink while counting. He asked one more thing before he let the ledger close. He asked whether tokens had replaced cleared cards to avoid paper. Ada said tokens were convenient. Callow asked whether tokens had been issued to non-boarders. Ada said tokens went to keep the house calm. Callow asked whether Mr. Lott ever held a token. Ada did not answer. Lot smiled without showing teeth and folded his papers slowly. Callow wrote that sentence down, too. He did not need proof of who held what to justify a demand for records. He needed to show that the system sold order at a price, and that the price was paid by women who could not refuse. He did not take the ledger away. He asked for certified copies of specific pages by noon Saturday under his authority. He wrote the sections he wanted on a single sheet in front of everyone. 2 pages of tickets and coins with X-cross, 2 pages of rent with adjustments, 1 page of lady circle slips. He added a line about any plate made in the lamp room on a night when inspections were underway. Hay said no plates existed. Lenora stood behind the clerk and said one did. Hay looked at her and did the calculation on his face, the risk in denying, the risk in conceding, the instinct to protect a scheme by calling a girl improper. He said he had made 1 test plate. He did not say where it was. Callow wrote the word test on his sheet and looked at Ada. She said nothing. He left the house and posted his request on the courthouse door and in the paper with the same plain block letters. He did not shout. He wrote deadlines. The Gulf did what men do not plan for. On Friday night, a storm line rolled in and sat 3 hours over the Back Bay. It was not a great hurricane. It was enough to push water up the alleys and into the Bath Wharf pilings. The wharf buckled aboard at the center and threw the barrel into the bay. It also lifted a crate from under the pier, a crate Ada had used to store char when she cleaned the lantern chimneys and scrap paper tied with string. The string came loose in the chop. 3 things floated out that no one ever intended to float. A towel with a thumb ridge pressed into one corner where a cleared card had been shown too often. A token with a cross that lodged in a knot of rope and clinked when the slop receded. And a glass plate in a sleeve that had wedged between 2 crossbeams. In the morning, Jewel found the token in the scum line and the plate under the slat, where she bent to rescue the towel. She put the token in her pocket and carried the plate to the sisters, because there was no one else she trusted who would not sell it back to the house. The plate was the clean outline of a hand holding a token at chest height. It did not show a face. It did not have to. It showed the lamp room door frame and the ledger corner and the ring of the lantern. Lenora brought it to Henry with the towel dark and stiff around it and asked whether the sleeve would hold. He said yes if he did not try to pull a print. He made a tracing of the shape and called it a diagram. He laid the tracing over the rubbing, and the desk edge and the ledger's corner matched within a thumb width, because rooms do not move between nights when the same man arranges them. Saturday at noon, Ada delivered copies. The rent pages had adjustments. The ticket pages had X-cross and neat round figures. The lady circle list for the week was complete. The single entry missing was a plate log. Hay said again that nothing had been made besides a test. Merritt described the night he had heard the instruction about hands. Callow accepted the copies and the denial and said thank you in a tone that made people think the matter might rest. He then asked if any woman had a note to submit under the statute about lodging rules that affected wages. The room did not speak because no one wanted to be first. Hattie moved. She placed her rent sheet with the embossed cross ghost on the back on the table. She did not look at Ada while she did it. Lenora placed the rubbing. Emma placed the notice with the deadlines and wrote in pencil at the bottom one plate, tracing on file. Miss Prescott put her hands on her biscuit tin and took them away because she understood that the tin had become a piece of a machine she did not mean to build. Lot stayed in the hall and turned his ring once. Callow did not call it a hearing. He called it the taking of statements. He wrote that the house required daily cleanliness cards bundled with rent, that cleared cards and tokens were offered selectively, that tokens were shown in halls instead of tickets, that lady circle slips were used to route women to later bathing hours and afternoon meetings, and that rent adjustments appeared on nights when tokens crossed to men. He wrote that a camera had been present in rooms where inspections occurred. He wrote that a woman had provided a rubbing that matched the desk where tickets and token sums were kept. He wrote that a plate tracing showed a token lifted to a chest by lamplight in a doorway. He wrote that a city inspector had heard the pastor instruct a woman to place her hands on the washstand for your protection. He sent the packet to Austin. He posted a notice of provisional rules on the boarding house door that afternoon. No house may tie bathing access to church attendance slips. No house may require after-hours inspections not related to illness. Any card or token that affects rent or assignment must be logged by name and amount. Any camera in a room used for inspection must be declared and kept capped. He did not ban the word cleared. He banned charging for it. Ada did not argue in public. She released 2 maids, packed a trunk, and took a room with a cousin on Market Street. She sold the house a year later to a man who turned the parlor into a cigar room and the lamp room into a broom closet. She kept the ledger under her bed until the day she died, and then her niece sold it to a collector who did not understand what he bought until Emma asked to borrow it for a week and returned it with a paper marker in the section labeled Adjustments. Pastor-physician Hay resigned from the city in a letter that spoke of strain and ingratitude. He preached 2 more Sundays about storms and steadfastness, and then left the island for a church in the prairie where no one asked him about peepholes. He never mentioned the camera again. Silas Lott moved to a bigger house and hired a clerk to carry his newspaper. He learned to use different rooms. Miss Prescott stayed and kept the lady circle going without slips. She visited Hattie once and said a line that sounded like an apology and a defense together. We believed we were helping. Hattie said we needed water and a lock on the parlor. Jewel married a fisherman who did not like town work and took the token she had kept as insurance and threw it into the channel where men drop fish heads. It did not sink. It clinked twice against a piling and then fell out of sight. The state printed a circular after Callow's report. It told boarding house owners that bathing fees must be posted, that rent could not carry discipline under a name that was not illness, that tokens could not be substituted for receipts, that church slips could not set hours, and that any camera in a lodging used for inspection was a violation unless written consent was obtained and a door remained open. Emma printed the circular on page 2 and a short column on page 1 with names withheld and the phrase, "The island will not buy the word cleared with a coin again." She did not call anyone vile. She called the math. Hattie kept sewing and paid a month's rent to a different landlady who asked no questions at 6. Lenora worked part-time for Henry, sweeping and learning to set small type for notices and to trust the feel of an honest claim under her thumb. She kept the plates in a towel in a trunk under a dress until the emulsion turned and the images fled. The towel stayed. Ada's bath wharf washed out in a stronger storm a few years later, and no one rebuilt it. The pilings rotted down to stumps that caught weed and rope until children called the place Splinters. Men bathed at home when they could. Women held their cards to their own mirrors and called themselves clean without paying for a stamp. The island learned that a ledger is a room if you let it be, and that you can walk out of a room if you are willing to read what is actually written on the page and say it aloud. Nail, the purity tickets did not sell decency, they sold permission. until the receipts made permission too expensive to defend.